When I was 14, a couple test drove me and another foster kid for a week, then sent him back an hour after choosing me because I wet the bed. When I overheard her on the phone that night, she said, maybe we should have kept Jamie. At least he was toilet trained. I stayed quiet. That was 4 years ago. Last month, she was arrested in front of her house. When I was 14, this couple pulled up to the group home in their Tesla, saying they needed to test 2 boys for a week. I was pick number 2. They explained they wanted to adopt 1 child to improve their home life, but first wanted to make sure they got the right fit. The woman adjusted her designer sunglasses. We've had disappointments before. A boy who seemed perfect, but had anger issues. Another who stole from us. She studied us like we were puppies at a pound. So we figured, why not trial 2 boys? See who fits our lifestyle better. The man nodded. It's like a week-long interview. Best behavior wins a family. Jamie was staring at his beat-up sneakers. I could see him already accepting defeat. The caseworker pulled me aside while they talked to Jamie. My caseworker squeezed my shoulder and whispered, just be better than him, whatever it takes. The first night was weird. This will be your room, my foster mom said. 2 beds, like a real brother's room. They made salmon for dinner. Jamie and I both rushed to set the table, bumping into each other. The woman laughed. There's enough love for both of you this week, she said. That night, Jamie whispered in the dark, I always lose these things. Don't feel bad when they pick you. I told him to shut up, but I couldn't stop my voice from shaking. Tuesday, she made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. Jamie and I competed over who could compliment them more. Best pancakes ever. No, best pancakes in the universe. The man took us both to get new shoes. Jamie picked the cheapest ones. I did too. Some kind of foster kid code. Wednesday, they taught us to swim in their private pool. When changing, the man saw both our bruises. Mine from Davis. Jamie's looked older, deeper. Oh my gosh, he whispered. We're filing reports. You're both safe now. That afternoon, I accidentally called her mom. Jamie kicked me under the table, but she just laughed. That works, she said, then turned to Jamie. You too, sweetheart. Jamie's whole face changed. That night, we stopped competing. When Jamie spilled juice at dinner, I said I did it. When I couldn't figure out the TV remote, he helped without making it obvious. We were a team. Thursday, they took us to their country club. Our boys, they introduced us, not foster kids, their boys. Some woman said Jamie had the dad's eyes and he nearly cried right there. That night, Jamie showed me his only possession, a photo of his birth mom. She was 15 when she had me, he said. Sometimes I pretend she's looking for me. We stayed up talking until 3 a.m., planning how maybe they'd keep us both, how we'd be real brothers. They seem rich enough, Jamie said hopefully. Maybe they'll change their minds. I fell asleep believing it. Friday morning, the woman's eyes were red. The man kept clearing his throat. They'd made French toast, but neither of them ate. Jamie and I exchanged looks. We both knew that face. The we need to talk face. We've made our decision, the woman announced at breakfast. Jamie grabbed my hand under the table. Jamie, can we talk to you privately? He followed them to the living room. I heard crying. When he came back, his face was broken. They picked you, he whispered. I leave in an hour. We spent that hour in our room. He gave me the photo of his mom. Keep it safe, he said. Maybe we'll find each other again when we age out. I gave him my only good hoodie. The couple drove him away while I watched from the window. The woman was crying. We wish we could keep both, she said when they returned. But wishes don't mean poop in foster care. Friday night, they sat me down with cocoa and paperwork. We want to adopt you, the woman said. For real. Forever. But all I could think about was Jamie's empty bed. Saturday felt different. They kept taking photos. We made pizza, and I let them win the flower fight. The man showed me his workshop. For your room, he said about the birdhouse. Your room. Not Jamie's and mine, just mine. That night, they tucked me in. Both beds still there. Jamie's stripped bare. Good night, Mom. Good night, Dad. They smiled so wide. I woke up screaming at 3 a.m. The nightmare was about my birth mom, but she had Jamie's scared eyes. I'd wet the bed, soaked through everything. I tried to clean it, but they heard. The woman flicked on the light and just stared. The man appeared behind her, and his face went from concerned to disgusted. It's okay, the woman said, but she was already pulling out her phone. I heard her in the hallway. Yes, tonight. We didn't sign up for damaged goods. Maybe we should have kept Jamie. At least he was toilet trained. The man brought garbage bags. They didn't speak on the drive back. The woman kept checking her mirrors like I might pee in the Tesla too. The director sighed and led me back to my old room. Davis was waiting, smiling. Heard you tried to snitch. Full story on channel. Link below. Davis grabbed my shirt and slammed me against the wall hard enough to knock the wind out of me. His fist connected with my stomach, and I doubled over gasping while he whispered that snitches get worse than stitches. The director stood in the doorway watching like she always did when Davis handled problems. He hit me 3 more times before dragging me to the bathroom, where he shoved my head in the toilet and held it there until black spots danced in my vision. When he finally let me up, I was choking on dirty water, and he just laughed and told everyone I pissed myself again. Nobody helped me to the nurse even though blood was dripping from my nose onto the floor. That night I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jamie's face when they told him he wasn't good enough. The next morning, they put me in the therapeutic wing after I threw a chair at the breakfast table when Davis called me a bedwetter. The therapist had thick glasses and kept writing notes while asking why I wet the bed at the Lawson's house. I stared at the wall and counted the cracks in the paint instead of answering her questions about trauma responses and regression. She wrote selective mutism on her clipboard and scheduled me for daily sessions. 5 days passed without me saying a single word to anyone. On the 6th day, Terry snuck into the therapeutic wing during shift change when the nurses were switching paperwork. He pulled out his phone and showed me security footage from the night I came back from the Lawsons. The video showed Davis attacking me in the hallway before I even made it to our room. But then Terry swiped to more videos and my stomach dropped. There were weeks of footage showing Davis beating younger kids behind the gym, Davis forcing 12-year-olds to fight each other for his entertainment while staff watched and did nothing, Davis selling pills to kids who couldn't be older than 10. Terry had been recording everything on his phone for months, waiting for someone brave enough to help him stop it. We spent the next hour uploading all 47 videos to a shared cloud folder using the therapeutic wing's computer while the nurse was on her smoke break. The videos showed Davis dealing drugs to middle schoolers in the bathroom, staff members taking bribes to look the other way, kids getting hurt while adults counted money in the background. Terry created 3 backup accounts and spread the videos across different platforms. 2 weeks into my therapeutic wing stay, I tried writing Jamie a letter I knew I'd never send. I told him about finding the videos and how Davis was hurting everyone. I wrote about how the Lawsons' pool felt like heaven for those few minutes before everything went wrong. I crumpled it up and flushed it down the toilet because foster kids don't get to keep in touch. Ms. Carson came for her monthly check-in and found me in the rec room. I showed her one video on Terry's phone of Davis beating a 10-year-old while 2 staff members watched. Her face went white and her hands started shaking as she watched the whole thing. She looked around to make sure nobody was listening, then leaned close and hissed that this could shut down Willowbrook completely. She told me to delete everything immediately, or she'd make one phone call to have me transferred to Riverside. Everyone knew Riverside was the lockdown facility where violent kids disappeared and never came back. I screamed that she was supposed to protect us, but she just pulled out her phone and started dialing. She said I had 10 seconds to decide between deleting the videos or getting shipped to Riverside by morning. That night, Terry created more backup accounts and set them to auto-post in 30 days unless we reset the timer. We were just 14 and 15 planning like we were in witness protection because nobody else would protect us. After 3 weeks, they released me from the therapeutic wing back to the main dorms. Davis smiled when I walked into the common room and everyone stopped talking to watch what would happen. He just nodded at me like he owned me now and went back to his card game. The night supervisor started bed checks at 9, but Davis slipped him $50 when he got to our room. I watched through cracked eyes as the money changed hands and the supervisor walked past without checking our bunks. Terry filmed the whole thing from his bed, using his phone tucked under his pillow. The clock by Davis's bed showed 3 a.m. when I woke up to metal scraping against metal. Davis stood over my bed holding the big scissors from the art room. "Heard you still have that picture," he said. I grabbed his wrist just as the blade came down toward my pillow. We fought without making noise because the cameras would catch us if we got too loud. His fist connected with my ribs while I tried to twist the scissors away. Terry jumped on Davis's back and wrapped his arm around his throat. The 3 of us crashed into the nightstand, but nobody came to check. Davis elbowed Terry in the stomach and swung the scissors at my face. What's really going on with this whole adoption test drive situation? The Lawsons show up with their fancy car talking about trying out kids like they're shopping for furniture, which makes me wonder what kind of people actually think that's okay. I ducked, but the blade caught my cheek and warm blood ran down my neck. Terry bit Davis's shoulder hard enough to make him drop the scissors. I kicked them under my bed while Davis punched Terry in the mouth. We kept fighting for what felt like forever, but was probably 5 minutes. Davis finally stumbled back to his bed with a bloody nose and split lip. Terry's eye was already swelling shut, and my ribs hurt with every breath. None of us slept the rest of the night. At breakfast, we sat at different tables with our faces messed up. The staff supervisor looked at us and then went back to his newspaper. A 7-year-old named Carlos stared at the cut on my face. "What happened to you?" he asked. "Fell," I said. He looked at Terry's black eye and Davis's busted lip and nodded like he understood. That's how it works here, because everyone learns to lie about everything. After breakfast, I snuck into the computer room during free time. The old desktop took forever to load, but I found Oakwood Academy's Instagram page. I scrolled through their swim team photos from last month. There was Jamie in the back row wearing my hoodie under his team jacket. He looked healthy, and his smile seemed real for once. The caption said they won their division, and Jamie got most improved swimmer. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, wondering if he ever thought about me. Terry's mom came for her supervised visit that afternoon. She had to sit at the plastic table in the visitor's room with a staff member watching. Terry showed her the bruises on his arms and told her everything about Davis. She started crying and said she would call reporters and lawyers and anyone who would listen. The supervisor wrote something on his clipboard about her being emotionally unstable. 2 days later, we got a letter saying her visits were suspended for 3 months. Terry didn't talk to anyone for a week after that. I was in the shower Thursday morning when Davis walked into the bathroom. He held up Jamie's mom's photo that I'd hidden in my pillowcase. "Flush the videos or I flush this," he said, holding it over the toilet. That photo was my only connection to Jamie and his real family. I tackled Davis, and we both crashed through the stall door. The photo fell from his hand and landed right in the toilet water. I reached for it while Davis grabbed my head and slammed it against the porcelain porcelain. My vision went blurry, but I kept reaching for the photo. Terry ran in with his phone recording everything. Davis saw the phone and let go of my head to grab for it. I pulled the photo out of the toilet while they fought over the phone. The paper was soaked, and the image was already blurring. 2 days later, a new kid arrived at Willowbrook. Kevin was 13 and wore a medical alert bracelet that said diabetic. The director told us his parents' lawyer made them let him keep a phone for emergencies. Terry and I looked at each other across the common room. Kevin didn't know it yet, but he was about to become very important to us. I spent hours drying Jamie's mom's photo with toilet paper from the bathroom. Her face looked like someone painted it with watercolors now. The edges were torn, and you could barely make out her features anymore. I hid it inside my pillowcase again and checked on it every few hours. Kevin complained about the Wi-Fi sucking in his room the first week. Terry offered to help him find better signal spots around the building. We showed him the spot by the cameras in the hallway and near the loading dock where Davis did his deals. Kevin thought we were just being friendly, but we had bigger plans. Ms. Carson came back with her supervisor 2 weeks after I'd called her. Daniel has made serious allegations, she said in the director's office. They interviewed me with Davis sitting in the next room. I could hear his fist hitting the wall every time I answered a question. After an hour, they stood up and shook the director's hand. No evidence of abuse found, they concluded. The door closed behind them, and Davis walked past me in the hallway with this huge smile on his face. Kevin found me that night in the bathroom trying not to cry and showed me his phone screen where the Lawsons had posted on Instagram about Jamie having attachment disorders and needing special help at some treatment center. The caption said they were committed to helping their son through his mental health struggles, but the comments were all about how brave they were for not giving up on such a difficult child. I knew right then they were already setting up the story for when they dumped him too. A month passed after that failed investigation, and I started stealing printer paper from the library during study time, writing down everything that happened each day with exact times and who saw what. Terry found me one night with my stack of papers and called it evidence building, but I just called it survival because nobody else was going to save us. The night supervisor started bringing his nephew around after midnight, and we all knew the kid was dealing because he'd park his Honda behind the dumpsters and people would come and go all night. Kevin had fixed his old phone with parts from the computer lab and started recording the license plates, the handoffs through the kitchen window, even got clear video of money changing hands. We weren't just building a case against Davis anymore. We were documenting the whole rotten system. 3 weeks into this, the director called a surprise room inspection at 6 in the morning, and I knew Davis had planted something because he kept looking at me during breakfast. Terry had seen him near my room the night before and moved whatever pills Davis hid in my mattress into Davis's own locker while he was in the shower. When they found the baggie of oxys in his locker, Davis went absolutely crazy, throwing chairs and screaming that I set him up, but nobody believed him because of his record. They sent him to juvenile detention for 2 weeks, and the little kids actually smiled at dinner for the first time in months. I knew he'd be back though, because the system always brings them back no matter what they do. During those 2 weeks of peace, I taught Kevin how to encrypt his files on an old laptop we found in storage, and he showed me how every photo and video has invisible information called metadata that proves exactly when and where it was taken. We spent hours organizing everything, building folders of evidence that couldn't be questioned or dismissed. Terry's older brother Daniel got out of prison and came for family visiting day, which was usually just kids sitting alone in the cafeteria pretending their families might show up. Daniel was huge, covered in tattoos, and when Terry told him everything about Davis and the drugs and the beatings, Daniel leaned forward and asked for names, said he'd handle it his way. Terry shook his head and told him we were doing this legal, doing this right, that we had a plan. The day before Davis was supposed to come back, Ms. Carson pulled me aside after our session, and her hands were actually shaking when she told me Davis's uncle was a cop, that his whole family had connections throughout the system. She said if I didn't drop this whole thing, I'd disappear into some group home upstate where nobody would ever hear from me again, and I could tell she was genuinely scared for me. That night, we researched journalists who covered foster care stories and found Rebecca Johnson at the Connecticut Herald, who'd won a Pulitzer for exposing abuse at a state facility 5 years ago. Kevin set up an anonymous email account using the library computer, and we started writing everything down, organizing our evidence, preparing to send it all. Davis came back the next morning with an ankle monitor and pure rage in his eyes, but he didn't come for me that first night like I expected. Instead, he went straight for Kevin, grabbed his phone during lunch, and stomped on it over and over until it was just plastic powder on the cafeteria floor, while screaming about how there wouldn't be any more recording, any more evidence, any more games. Kevin just stood there staring at the plastic pieces on the floor while Davis walked away laughing and the staff pretended they didn't see anything happen. The next morning, 2 people in suits showed up at the front desk demanding to see Director Hoffman, and I could hear the man's voice from down the hall saying something about assault charges. Kevin's parents looked nothing like the usual foster parents who visited. His dad wore a 3-piece suit, and his mom had this briefcase that probably cost more than everything I owned. Hoffman came out of her office trying to do her fake smile thing, but Kevin's father cut her off and said that phone was medical equipment for his son's hearing issues. The word lawsuit made Hoffman's face go white, and she started making excuses about how boys will be boys, but Kevin's mother pulled out her phone and started recording everything. They took Kevin into the visiting room, and I watched through the door window as he showed them the bruises on his arms that definitely weren't from Davis breaking the phone. About an hour later, Kevin's father asked to speak with me privately, and Hoffman couldn't say no without looking suspicious, so she let him take me into the small conference room. He introduced himself as Mr. Johnson and asked if I knew what happened to Kevin's phone, so I told him everything about Davis and the ankle monitor and how he came back angry. Mr. Johnson wrote everything down in this leather notebook and then asked if there was more going on here than just bullying. I looked at the door to make sure nobody was listening and pulled out my phone to show him one of the videos Terry had uploaded to the cloud before they took his phone. His face changed completely when he saw the night supervisor hitting that kid from 2 weeks ago, and he asked how many videos we had. I told him maybe 30 or 40, and he closed his notebook and leaned forward, asking if I'd be willing to testify about what I'd seen. So the director just happens to let a lawyer parent into a private room with Daniel after all these cover-ups? Something tells me Mr. Johnson showing up right when Davis destroyed that phone isn't just lucky timing. Kevin's parents seem way too prepared for this whole situation. Before I could answer, Hoffman knocked on the door saying visiting hours were over, but Mr. Johnson handed me his business card and said to call if anything else happened to any of us. Later that day, Terry and I were in the library pretending to do homework when I told him about Mr. Johnson being a civil rights lawyer. Terry kept shaking his head, saying lawyers only care about their own kids, and Kevin's dad probably just wanted to get him out of here. But I remembered when Victoria had that lawyer at the country club and how different everything felt when adults with power actually gave a damn. Terry said we should wait for the reporter lady to respond, but I thought maybe we needed both, someone on the inside and someone on the outside. That night, I had the worst dream where Jamie and I were back in Victoria's pool, but the water was thick and black like oil. Jamie kept trying to tell me something, but every time he opened his mouth, the black water would pour in and he'd sink deeper. He kept saying they're watching over and over until I couldn't see him anymore, just bubbles coming up through the black. I woke up gasping and found Davis standing right next to my bed, just staring down at me in the dark. He didn't say anything, just stood there for maybe 5 minutes before walking back to his bed, and I stayed awake the rest of the night with my back against the wall. 3 days later, Mr. Johnson came back, but this time he brought another man who he introduced as a former federal prosecutor named Mr. Reeves. They met with me and Terry in the conference room, and Mr. Reeves explained how they could file charges under something called RICO, which meant they could go after everyone involved, not just individual staff members. Mr. Johnson pulled out a flip phone from his briefcase and showed us how to upload the videos to a secure Dropbox that only they could access. He said to keep the phone hidden inside this hollowed-out law textbook he brought, and only use it when we were absolutely sure nobody was watching. Mr. Reeves gave us his direct number and said to call immediately if anyone tried to hurt us or destroy evidence. After they left, things got weird fast because the night supervisor started doing rounds every hour instead of every few hours, and he'd shine his flashlight right in our faces to make sure we were really asleep. Davis figured out the pattern and started sleeping in shifts with 2 other kids, so someone was always awake watching when staff came through. We were all exhausted from barely sleeping, and kids were starting to make mistakes during the day, which got them in trouble with staff. 2 weeks passed before we finally got an email back from Rebecca Martinez saying she was interested in our story but needed to verify everything before her editor would approve it. Kevin's dad set up a meeting at his law office and told Hoffman it was for Kevin's medical evaluation, but really, Rebecca interviewed me and Terry for 3 hours. She had this tiny recorder that looked like a regular pen, and she asked about everything from the food to the punishment room to what happened to kids who tried to run. Terry showed her the scars on his back from when he first got here and tried to escape, and she took photos with her phone. She said she needed to interview more kids to establish a pattern and asked if we could help her get access without raising suspicion. The next week, I was in the library when I saw this newspaper someone left on the table with Jamie's face on the front page of the local section. The headline said, "Local Teen Wins State Science Fair," and there was a picture of him holding this huge trophy with 2 adults who the article called his supportive adoptive parents. The article talked about how he'd built some kind of water filtration system and was headed to nationals, but there was no mention of the group home or foster care or the week he had a brother. I stared at that photo until the librarian said we had to leave, and I kept thinking about how his new parents were there, cheering for him while I was hiding evidence in textbooks. That same night, Davis cornered Terry in the shower room when everyone else was at dinner, and I heard the screaming from down the hall. By the time I got there, Terry was on the floor, and his whole back was bright red from where Davis had held him under the hot water. Davis kept asking where the videos were, but Terry just lay there shaking and couldn't talk. For 3 days, Terry couldn't speak at all, and we had to bring him food because he couldn't leave his bed without crying from the pain. But he never told Davis anything about the phone or the Dropbox or the lawyers, and I knew he was tougher than any of us. The next Monday, Rebecca showed up at the group home as a volunteer tutor computer, which Hoffman had apparently approved because it looked good for their state reviews. She had that pen recorder going the whole time and managed to interview 6 different kids while pretending to help them with homework. Davis sat at a table across the room the entire time, just watching her and watching us, but he couldn't get close enough to hear what anyone was saying. Rebecca asked each kid about specific dates and incidents we'd told her about, and every single one had something to add that we hadn't even known about. One kid showed her burn marks under his shirt, and another talked about medication they were forced to take that made them sleep all day. She wrote everything down in this purple notebook while pretending to explain math problems, and I could see Davis getting more and more angry, but he couldn't do anything with Hoffman's office right down the hall. 2 days later, Kevin's parents filed their complaint, and suddenly we had state inspectors showing up for a routine visit that nobody expected. The director's face went white when they walked through the front door with clipboards and badges. Staff started running around like crazy, shoving contraband into closets and scrubbing rooms that hadn't been cleaned in forever. Davis watched it all happen, and I could see him putting pieces together in his head. He grabbed 3 older boys after lunch, and they started their own watch system. Kids stationed at every corner taking notes on who talked to who. We couldn't even whisper in the hallways anymore without someone reporting back to Davis. Terry and I started leaving notes in the bathroom stalls, writing on toilet paper that we'd flush right after reading. 3 months had passed since I came back from the Lawsons, and I realized one night that I hadn't cried once since then. Terry said trauma does that to you, makes you go numb inside. I told him being numb was better than feeling everything. The federal investigator showed up the next week, this serious woman in a suit who interviewed each of us alone in the conference room. Davis went first and played the perfect victim, telling her how scared he was of the younger kids causing trouble. But Kevin's dad had given her copies of all our videos, and Davis's story didn't match what was on tape. She called him back for a second interview, then a third, and each time he came out, his jaw was tighter. That night I woke up to smoke and screaming. Davis had lit Terry's mattress on fire while Terry was still sleeping on it. The smoke alarms were shrieking and kids were running everywhere, and in all that chaos, Davis leaned close to my ear. Your fault when someone dies. The fire department came with 3 trucks and cops and everything. They filed an official report about arson at a youth facility, which automatically triggered another state review. Kevin's father made sure that report went to 3 different agencies because he told us bureaucracy could be a weapon if you knew how to use it. After the fire, Davis changed completely. He stopped eating regular meals, stopped making threats, just sat there watching everyone with dead eyes. The little kids could feel something bad coming, and we started taking shifts, staying awake at night to watch him back. Then Rebecca's article dropped online with the title, Inside Connecticut's Willowbrook, a Foster Care Nightmare, and all our videos were right there for everyone to see. Davis's face was blurred, but you could still tell it was him if you knew him. The article went viral in 6 hours with thousands of shares and comments. The next morning, news vans pulled up outside, and reporters started knocking on the doors. The director locked everything down and said nobody could have any outside contact at all. But Kevin's parents got an emergency court order from a judge, and suddenly we were allowed supervised phone calls with lawyers. That same night, the overnight supervisor, Rodriguez, disappeared with $30,000 from the office safe and a bunch of kids' ADHD meds he was planning to sell. When morning staff showed up and found the safe empty and Rodriguez gone, they had to call it in. His theft triggered an automatic state takeover because of the missing controlled substances. Federal marshals showed up at dawn with their badges and guns and serious faces. They pulled us all into the main hall and started separating kids into different rooms for questioning. A marshal with gray hair and tired eyes pointed at me and Terry and said we'd go first since Rebecca's article mentioned us by name. They took me to Hoffman's office where she sat behind her desk, looking smaller than usual, while 2 marshals set up a recorder. The gray-haired one opened a thick folder and started asking about Davis and everything that happened since I got here 3 years ago. I told them about the beatings and the threats and how he'd wait until staff left to corner kids in the bathroom. The marshal nodded and pushed Davis's file across the desk, showing reports from 2 other facilities with the same exact patterns of abuse. Hoffman's face went white when she saw the dates because they were from before Davis even came to our facility. The marshal asked her directly if she knew about his history, and she started crying but wouldn't answer. Why does Davis suddenly stop eating and making threats after the fire? That shift from aggressive to just watching with dead eyes makes me wonder what he's really planning now that everything's falling apart around him. They kept me in that office for 6 hours going through every incident, and every time staff looked the other way. When they finally let me out, Terry was waiting in the hallway, and we went to the cafeteria where investigators were boxing up files from the main office. Terry grabbed my arm and said we did it, but I was thinking about Jamie and wondering if he saw Rebecca's article wherever he was now. I kept picturing him reading about how I finally fought back and hoping he'd be proud of me for not giving up. That's when Davis's uncle showed up in his cop uniform, demanding to take Davis home. The federal agents blocked the door, and one of them said Davis was a federal witness now and couldn't leave. The uncle started yelling about family rights and jurisdiction, but the agents didn't move. He tried to push past them and grabbed one agent's shoulder, which was the stupidest thing he he could have done. They had him in handcuffs within seconds, charging him with obstruction of justice and interference with a federal investigation. Davis watched from the doorway as they led his uncle out to a patrol car, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. 3 days later, we were at the courthouse for an emergency custody hearing. Kevin's parents sat in the front row with their lawyer explaining to the judge how they wanted to foster Terry and me temporarily while the investigation continued. The judge reviewed our files and all the evidence from the facility and kept shaking her head at what she was reading. She asked Kevin's parents if they understood what they were taking on, and Kevin's mom said they'd already prepared rooms for both of us. The judge stamped the papers and said placement approved pending the full investigation. A week later, I was sitting at a real dinner table for the first time since the Lawsons rejected me. Kevin's mom made spaghetti and garlic bread, and nobody had to fight over portions or watch their back while eating. Terry kept looking around like he couldn't believe we were actually in a normal house with normal people. He started crying right into his garlic bread, and Kevin's mom just rubbed his back without asking questions. The next morning, Ms. Carson showed up at Kevin's house saying she needed to talk to me. She sat on the porch looking older than I remembered and said she tried to protect us within the system's limitations. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording I'd made of her threatening to send me to Riverside if I didn't stop complaining about Davis. She stood up without another word and walked to her car, and I never saw her again. 2 days later, they transferred Davis to federal juvenile detention to wait for his trial. I watched from Kevin's bedroom window as they led him out in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. He looked up and saw me and mouthed the words, "I'll find you," but he was in chains and I was free. That same afternoon, the Lawsons called Kevin's parents after seeing Rebecca's article online. Kevin's dad answered, and I could hear them on speaker saying they wanted to help and offering to pay for therapy. Kevin's dad told them to direct any communication through lawyers and hung up. That night, everything hit me at once, and I started crying harder than I ever had in my life. 3 months of fear and pain came pouring out, and I couldn't stop shaking. Terry held me while I sobbed about Jamie and the Mickey Mouse pancakes and the pool and everything the Lawsons stole from us when they chose their perfect life over 2 broken kids. I cried until my throat was raw, and Terry just kept saying, "It's okay, we're safe now," over and over. A month later, Rebecca's article won 3 journalism awards, and she sent us a check for the full prize money. Her note just said for college, and it was the first time anyone ever assumed we'd have a future worth saving for. 2 weeks after that, the FBI showed up at Kevin's house where Terry and I were staying and started asking questions about every staff member we'd ever met at the group home. They had boxes of files and photos of people I hadn't thought about in years, and they wanted to know everything about who touched us and when and how often. The lead agent kept writing down names, and Terry recognized half of them from his 3 years before I got there. Within a month, they arrested 17 people, including the night janitor who sold videos, 2 counselors who took bribes to look away, and the cook who drugged kids' food when Davis wanted them unconscious. The investigation went back 12 years, and they found records of hundreds of kids who got hurt, but we were just the ones who finally fought back and had proof. Other kids started reaching out through Rebecca's article comments, and Kevin's dad set up a private Facebook group that grew to 43 members in 2 months. We met every Sunday in Kevin's basement, and some kids drove 3 hours just to sit in that circle and say what happened to them. Daniel from 2019 had burns on his back from Davis's older brother, and Sarah from 2021 couldn't stop her hands from shaking when she talked about the isolation room. Kevin's mom made sandwiches, and his dad took notes for the lawyers, and we all just sat there realizing we weren't alone, and we weren't crazy, and it really did happen. I started seeing a therapist who worked with foster kids, and the first session she asked about the Lawsons, and I told her about wetting the bed, and she just looked at me and said, "That's a trauma response, not a failure," and I cried for 20 minutes straight. 3 months into all this, I got an email from Jamie that just said, "I found your name in the article, and I know what they did to you because they're doing it to me now, but different ways, please help me." My hands were shaking so bad, I could barely forward it to Kevin's dad, who read it and said, "Psychological abuse is harder to prove," but called child services that same day. The investigation into the Lawsons started the next week, and they found 5 other boys before Jamie, who all got returned for behavioral issues after a few weeks or months. Davis's trial started in March, and I sat in that witness chair for 3 hours, showing the bruises and the videos and explaining every single thing he did, while his lawyer kept calling me a liar and an attention seeker. The judge had to call 2 recesses because jury members were crying, and when they played the video Terry took of Davis beating that 8-year-old kid, the whole courtroom went dead silent. Terry testified the next day, and that's when everything exploded, because he told them about the 2 younger boys Davis raped in the basement and how they never reported it because Davis said he'd kill them. Terry had been recording on his phone for months and had their voices saying what happened, and when the prosecutor played those recordings, you could hear people gasping in the gallery. The judge called a week break after that, and Kevin's family took us camping to get away from all the reporters and lawyers, and it was the first time I'd ever seen real stars without bars or mesh or dirty windows in the way. Terry and I stayed up all night by the fire just looking at the sky and not talking about any of it, because sometimes you just need to remember there's a whole world outside of courtrooms and group homes. When we got back, the investigation into the Lawsons had blown up because they found emails between them and other couples about trading kids like they were shopping for furniture and comparing notes on which boys were most desperate for love. Jamie had lost 15 pounds in 2 months because they stopped feeding him when he disappointed them, which was basically every day since he couldn't be perfect enough. He finally ran away and showed up at Kevin's house at 2 in the morning with just the clothes on his back, and Kevin's mom took one look at him and called emergency services while making him eat everything in the fridge. 2 weeks later, they let me see Jamie at the group therapy place downtown. He was sitting in the waiting room wearing my old hoodie that hung loose on him now since he'd lost so much weight. We both stood there not knowing what to do with our hands or where to look. The therapist watched us from the doorway like we were some kind of science experiment. Jamie pulled something from his pocket, and I realized it was the photo of his mom he'd given me that week, but I still had the original in my wallet. He must have gotten a copy made. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, and the silence felt heavy. His hands kept shaking, and he kept pulling the hoodie sleeves down over them. I wanted to say something about how sorry I was, or ask if he was okay, but the words got stuck. The therapist finally left us alone, and Jamie just stared at the floor. I pulled out his mom's photo from my wallet and slid it across the coffee table. He looked at it for a long time, then pushed it back to me. "Keep it," he said quietly. Those were the only words we said to each other that whole hour. The next morning, Victoria and Richard showed up at Kevin's house with 2 police officers demanding Jamie back. Kevin's dad met them at the front door, but he wasn't alone. 3 people in dark suits with federal badges stood behind him. "Jamie Rodriguez is in protective custody pending investigation of child endangerment," one of the agents said. Victoria started screaming about their rights, and Richard tried to push past them, but the agents didn't move. "You're both under arrest for child endangerment and abuse," the agent continued. The police officers who came with them looked confused until the agent showed them some paperwork. Victoria's face went white when she saw whatever was on those pages. They put them both in handcuffs right there on Kevin's front lawn while half the neighborhood watched. 3 weeks later, I had to testify at Davis's trial. The courtroom was packed with kids from Willowbrook and their new foster families. Davis sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller than I remembered. The prosecutor showed pictures of my bruises and the bruises on 6 other kids. Terry crying into his garlic bread seems like such a strange detail to include. Why that specific image? The timing of Ms. Carson showing up right after they get placed feels convenient, and I'm curious why she'd even try that conversation knowing what they have on her. One kid who was only 8 had to testify by video because he was too scared to be in the same room as Davis. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, Davis didn't even react. The judge gave him 15 years, starting in juvenile detention, then transferring to adult prison when he turned 18. As we filed out of the courtroom, one of the younger kids Davis had hurt grabbed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Her foster mom quickly pulled her away, but I saw her mouth the words again. The next day, Director Hoffman took a plea deal. Her lawyer argued she was just overwhelmed and made mistakes, but the prosecutor had Ms. Carson's 17 reports that Hoffman had buried. The judge wasn't buying the sob story. "You had a duty to protect these children and you failed," he said. 2 years in prison and a lifetime ban from working with children. Hoffman cried through the whole sentencing, but nobody in that courtroom felt bad for her. Ms. Carson's trial was different. She wasn't on trial for crimes, but as a witness in the state's case against the whole system. She brought boxes of evidence, copies of every report she'd filed over 3 years. 17 reports about Davis alone, 23 about other abuse at Willowbrook. Each one stamped received by the state office, then filed away with no action taken. The state's lawyer tried to argue she should have done more, but Ms. Carson had receipts for everything. Certified mail slips, email read receipts, even recordings of phone calls where supervisors told her to stop making waves. The judge ordered an immediate audit of every group home in the state. That afternoon, the state announced Willowbrook's permanent closure. All of us were getting moved to vetted foster homes within the week. Terry and I got lucky because Kevin's mom had already started the paperwork to take us both. When the official foster placement came through, it felt weird signing papers that said we were brothers now, at least on paper. Kevin's mom made a big dinner to celebrate, but it felt more like relief than joy. The Lawsons' trial started 2 months later. Jamie and I had to testify on different days so we wouldn't see each other. I told them about the competition week, how they made us perform for them like dogs at a dog show. I told them about the Tesla ride back after they rejected me for wetting the bed. Jamie's testimony was worse. He talked about months of psychological torture after they chose him. No food if he disappointed them. Locked in his room if he showed any emotion they didn't like. They wanted a perfect doll, not a real kid with real problems. 5 other boys testified by video link from different states. All of them had similar stories about trial weeks and being discarded when they showed any sign of being actual humans with needs. One boy said they returned him after he got a B on a test. Another got sent back for crying when his birth dad died. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts of child abuse and endangerment, but the judge gave them a suspended sentence with probation because they had no prior record and good lawyers. No No jail time, but they went on the abuse registry and could never foster or adopt again. Jamie was finally free from them legally. That's when everything changed. A woman named Rosa Rodriguez had seen Jamie's picture in the news coverage of the trial. She was his biological grandmother, and she'd been searching for him for years. The state had told her Jamie's mom was dead, and Jamie was adopted by a good family. All lies. Rosa had proof she'd tried to get custody when Jamie was a baby, but the state said she was unfit because she was single and worked 2 jobs. Now she had a house and a steady income, and she wanted her grandson back. The court set a hearing for 2 weeks later, and Jamie had to meet with his grandmother 3 times before then. After the second visit, he pulled me aside in the cafeteria at Kevin's house, where we were all staying temporarily. "She's blood," he said, looking at his hands, "but you're the only family who fought for me." I told him blood doesn't mean everything, but love might, and he should give her a chance. He nodded, but kept picking at his food. That same week, Kevin's dad filed the federal lawsuit against the state with over 400 plaintiffs from group homes across Connecticut. "This isn't about money," he told us at dinner. "It's about changing the system." The paperwork was thick as a phone book and had all our testimonies plus medical records and photos of injuries. 2 weeks passed fast, and the morning Jamie had to leave, we met in the backyard one last time. He pulled my old hoodie from his bag and handed it back all folded neat. I gave him his mom's photo that Kevin's parents had paid to get restored by some professional who fixed old pictures. We promised to stay in touch, even though we both knew how these things went in foster care. His grandmother Rosa showed up in a Honda Civic with Puerto Rican flags hanging from the mirror and hugged him so tight I thought she might break him. 6 months went by in Kevin's house with therapy twice a week and nightmares most nights. The adoption hearing came in April with Terry and me standing in front of a judge who asked if we wanted to change our names. Terry kept Walker and I kept Smith because Daniel Smith survived Willowbrook, and that meant something. Kevin's mom cried when the judge signed the papers, and his dad took us all out for steaks. My first day at regular high school felt weird without the group home label following me around. Some girl in chemistry asked about the scars on my arms, and I just said I got them fighting back, which was true enough. Terry started his YouTube channel that week, talking about foster survival tips, and got 1,000 views the first day. Kids from all over started messaging him with their own stories, and we spent hours every night responding because nobody should fight alone. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning expecting Davis to be standing over my bed. The house stays quiet and safe, but my body remembers everything. Kevin's mom usually finds me in the kitchen making toast, and she makes cocoa without asking questions, which helps more than she knows. The lawsuit settled 8 months after we filed for $50 million split between all the survivors, plus federal oversight of Connecticut's foster system going forward. We actually changed the law and saved other kids from what we went through. Jamie texted me pictures from his new swim team, where he made varsity as a freshman. His grandmother's house looked small but clean, and he was smiling real in every photo, not that fake foster kid smile we all learned. Rebecca asked me to write everything down for her follow-up article, so I spent 3 weeks typing it all out with Terry adding his parts and Kevin editing for grammar. When Kevin's parents read the final version, his mom grabbed my hand and said, "We survived hell, and now we had to live." So we do that every single day, just trying to live normal lives after everything. Terry goes to therapy and talks to other foster kids online while I swim laps at the Y and try not to flinch when people touch me unexpected. Jamie visits once a month, and we play video games and don't talk about Willowbrook unless one of us needs to. Kevin's parents never ask us to call them mom and dad, but sometimes we do anyway. The nightmares come less often now, but they still come. Davis got 15 years, and the director got 10, and Ms. Carson died of a heart attack before trial. Sometimes I Google the Lawsons and wonder if they think about that week, or if they found another kid to test drive. Rosa sends me Puerto Rican food sometimes with notes saying I'm Jamie's brother, and that makes me family too. The foster system is still broken, but at least 400 kids got justice and money for college. I start freshman year at UConn in the fall studying social work because somebody who lived it needs to fix it. Terry's YouTube channel has 50,000 subscribers now, and he got invited to speak at conferences about trauma. We survived and we're healing, and some days that's enough. Most days, it has to be. That was such a cool dive into all those puzzling moments. I love going down these rabbit holes with you. Can't wait to do it again. Subscribe for more content like this.